Hi folks, welcome to Cloudbyveer YouTube channel. My name is Virender Jakhar and I welcome you all to this particular session. Now, this particular session has been designed on the topic of AWS Cloud Engineer interview based questions, and I have organized five different scenario based questions. In those five questions, we are going to discuss about five different particular scenarios of the real world problems faced by the different organizations, whether they are using AWS cloud or any other cloud as well. So you can relate those questions to the different cloud providers. No issues in that. So these five scenario based questions will give you an advanced overview to the AWS, different AWS services, how those different AWS services can help different organizations so that they can create their infrastructure related to those particular scenarios, whether it's a high resilient architecture, whether it's in cost optimization, whether it's related to the compliance and security or high availability. So after seeing in these five questions and after understanding these five questions, you will be having a high level understanding of how what type of AWS questions or scenario based questions are being asked in the interviews of AWS Cloud Engineer. So I have talked with different interviewers who are taking interviews of freshers as well as experienced IT professionals who are planning or who are preparing for AWS Cloud Engineer profile. So let's get started. First question is on the screen, and this particular question says a lot of things related to the different aspects or different points. So I'm going to read all these pointers and I'm going to read all the entire scenario and we'll try to understand this entire scenario, right? So this question number one is related to the high availability concept you can see over here and the disaster recovery, right? So what is the scenario? The scenario is that your company host or maybe an interviewer is asking you this question that your company hosts a critical application, right? Critical application means that you have a critical infrastructure, you have a critical database maybe on AWS. So the cloud provider is your AWS, Amazon Web Services. Now the application basically uses an RDS relational database and runs in a single availability zone or AZ. So inside AWS or Amazon Web Services, we have multiple geographical locations. These are named as regions. Inside those regions, we have multiple availability zones or AZs are the different physical locations which are created to provide high availability to the end users. Now the scenario says that your company hosts a critical application on AWS, right? And the application uses the RDS relational database and it will basically runs in a single availability zone. So you can run the database into multiple availability zones as well, but in this particular scenario, it runs in a single availability zone. So recently there was an easy outage, which means one availability zone in which your database is running. That availability zone is facing outage is because of that, it faces some downtime for the application. This is the scenario. Now, from this particular scenario, the question arises over here that how would you redesign the architecture to ensure high availability? So if you are a cloud engineer or you are a cloud architect, how would you redesign the architecture to ensure high availability to overcome this particular downtime which is causing on your application and disaster recovery for the application? So you can include specific AWS services and configurations in your answer. Now, what are the different specific AWS services and configurations you can include your answer? So the answer will look like this. So this question is basically to test the ability of the candidates and the particular understanding of the candidates related to the high availability, how high availability works in the AWS cloud, how disaster recovery works in the AWS cloud, and how as a cloud engineer or a solution architect you will be able to use different AWS services so that you will be able to create a resilient, high resilient architecture. So you can discuss about multi-AZ deployment of RDS. So the first pointer which you can include in your answer, that is your multi-AZ deployment of Amazon RDS. That is which means that you can deploy your RDS database instances into multiple availability zones. So in any circumstances like this circumstance, whether a single availability zone has been goes down, same scenario can happen inside that. But if you run your database into multiple availability zones, then if one AZ goes down, you have another AZ up and running that will able to handle the load of the application. So your application will not face any type of downtime. You can talk about read replicas. So a read replica can be also a solution, right? So with your primary database in one availability zone, you can create your Aurora read replicas in different availability zones that will be configured in such a way that will handle the read request of your application. So this is how the second pointer you can put over here, in which you can use the read replica to handle the read load of your application. Third point you can add over here is that route 53 and route 53, whatever you are comfortable, you can call it as this route or route. Route 53 is a DNS service from AWS, domain name system service from AWS. You can use route 53 to for your DNS failover, and you can use at last simple storage service or S3 for the data backups, right? So in your architecture, the architecture will look like that. You have multiple availability zones in which your RDS database instances are running. Maybe this will be your primary database, this will be your secondary database. If primary database goes down, automatically the load will be transferred to the secondary database, and that secondary database will be act as a primary database with the help of route 53. The request will directly route towards that secondary database, or you can use the read replica feature as well, so that it will able to handle the load of the read request of your application into another availability zone. And at last, simple storage service or S3, which is an object with storage service, which will be able to for the data backup basically, right? So this is how you can answer such type of questions. That was the question number one. Let's move towards the question number two, and let's see what type of scenario they have given over here. Okay, so the question number two is related to the security and compliance inside the organization, and the scenario is such: your company is subject to strict regulatory compliance requirements, and you need to ensure that all the data stored in simple storage service is encrypted. So as a cloud engineer or a solution architect, you must ensure that your data should be encrypted inside simple storage service. Additionally, you need to monitor as well whatever the activities are happening inside your organization or on your particular data which is having inside the simple storage service. You should monitor all the API activities and log access to this particular data. That is the scenario. Now, what type of question may come in this particular scenario is that how would you implement data encryption and monitor for S3 so that you will be able to meet these compliance requirements, and what specific AWS services and configurations would you see? That will be the question from the interviewer, and they will throw this question towards you, and you have to answer this question. Now, if you do not know how to encrypt the data inside simple storage service with the help of one service which is named as AWS KMS, key management service, to manage the key, you can watch my latest video, or the video just before this video. You can go to the video section in the channel and you can watch how we can encrypt the data inside simple storage service with the help of AWS KMS, and how we can perform this monitoring task with the help of one AWS service which is named as CloudTrail. So the practical demonstration for this entire scenario I have already been recorded. That will be in half an hour of video. You can watch that video, and your all the doubts will be pretty much clear in that particular video. Now, as of now, for the answer of this particular question, which is based on the security and compliance, the explanation will look like that. You should add the AWS KMS for the key management, your symmetric key or your asymmetric key, right? Whether you want to do customer side encryption or you want to do the AWS side encryption with the help of the key management service, you can use KMS. You can include KMS inside your answer, right? You can use S3 bucket side encryption as well. So when you are creating your bucket inside simple storage service, you can encrypt that bucket. Apart from that, you can use S3 bucket policies to provide the specific permissions to the data of your S3 buckets. You can use IAM roles, identity and access management roles, to provide granular permissions to the different end users. You can configure your CloudTrail. You can set up this CloudTrail so that you will be able to access the log to that particular bucket, and you can use another AWS service, that is your AWS Massey, for your data discovery and data classification. So inside your architecture, based on this particular scenario, you can add AWS key management service for the encryption part. So this encryption part will be solved, right? You can set up CloudTrail to monitor the log access to this particular data. So this will also be solved, and you should also able to meet these compliance requirements related to the data as well with the help of S3 bucket policy or IAM roles. This is how you can tackle these type of questions if these type of questions will ask in your interview basically. Let's move towards the question number 3 of this session. So the question number 3 is related to the cost optimization. Very important question, because whether at the end of the day, every organization is looking only upon the cost optimization. Every organization needs or they want to save the cost. So these type of questions will surely ask inside your interview. So the interviewer is giving a scenario to you that your company has seen a significant increase in AWS cost. So maybe this company is running on the AWS cloud and they are seeing that the cost has been increasing in the or a sudden spike in the increment of the cost over the past quarter maybe. So the finance team has asked you as a cloud engineer or maybe a solution architect to identify the different areas where cost can be optimized without compromising the performance. So this it's a very important question, guys. Very important question. Now the question is that what are the different steps as a cloud engineer you would take to analyze and optimize the AWS cost? So you should provide examples of specific AWS services and features you would use to create the cost optimized architecture. So this question is basically trying to identify the candidate's ability to analyze the AWS usage and how you are going to implement the cost saving measures or cost saving architecture for your organization. So each and every candidate should discuss about one AWS service, which is your AWS Cost Explorer, which is your AWS Cost Explorer, so that you can analyze your cost, right? So first you should analyze the cost. You will see what are the different AWS services are responsible for the significant increase in the AWS cost for the past quarter. So you will be using AWS Cost Explorer. You can set the budget for your organization. You can set up some alerts for your organization by going inside billing and cost management of the AWS management console. You can set the budget for the company for a particular month maybe, right? So if organization is saying that we can only spend $1 million per month, so you can set up a budget per month of $1 million. So if that cost is nearby or coming nearby to 1 million, you will get a notification on the official emails of the organization, and you can set up some alerts as well. Now, or otherwise, you can use one service which is Elastic Compute Cloud. With the help of this EC2 service, we usually create different virtual machines and the different EC2 instances. You can use reserved EC2 instance, right? You can use different saving plans provided by AWS, by which you can save up to 72% on on demand instances, right? You can use very beautiful service of AWS, which is AWS auto scaling, to automatically scale up or down your resources based on the requirement to optimize the resource usage. And you can use simple storage service life cycle policies, so that if transition of the data. If you want to transition inside your data, which is inside this Amazon S3, you will be able to manage the storage cost as well, because by default data goes to the standard storage class. If you automatically wants to move this data to different storage classes by providing a time limit or maybe a time period of 1 month or 1 day or in minutes or hours, you can use S3 lifecycle policies to make this transition automatically. So this will be your architecture, or this will be your answer, that I will use Cost Explorer to analyze the cost of the different AWS services which are giving increase in the significant cost of the inside the organization. I will set a budget, I will create some alerts, and I will use auto scaling, automatically scale up down the resources. I will use S3 lifecycle policies for the data transition into different storage classes. I will be using different EC2 instances options available in AWS, whether it's in reserved or it's in saving plans provided by the AWS. Fine. I think that is pretty much clear to all of you. Now let's move towards the next question. And next question is basically question number 4, which is based on the scalability and performance of the organization. What is the scenario? The scenario is that your web application is experiencing increased traffic. So you have an application, and the traffic is basically increasing on your application. Users are continuously reporting slower response time because maybe users are facing latency. That's why they are reporting. The application runs on EC2 instances behind an elastic load balancer. So you already have a ELB, which is elastic load balancer, to handle the load or to distribute equally load to the different EC2 instances. And the database is an RDS instance is your the database. Now the question is, how would you design the architecture to ensure that the application can handle increased traffic and maintain the performance? You can also include considerations for both web tier and the database tier. Basically, in a multi-tier architecture, we have different tiers available. We have application tier, we have a web tier, and we have a database tier, right? So this question is basically testing the knowledge of the candidate of how the candidate can design a scalable and high performance architecture on AWS. So whenever you see the word scalability, whether you see a word performance, maybe you should always start your answer with AWS auto scaling. AWS auto scaling for the high scalability, maybe because you can automatically scale up or scale down the EC2 instances or the resources inside your AWS account, right? And you can also implement some caching service, like you can use AWS or Amazon Elastic Cache for the database, right? You can employ RDS read replicas to handle the read request in another availability zone, so that users will not face this, latency or maybe the slower response on the application, right? And you can also use CloudFront. I will also include CloudFront in the architecture because CloudFront is a CDN, content delivery network service, which will be using AWS as locations to provide ultra low latency to the end users across the world to improve the response time on my application. These are the different AWS services. For the scalability, I will be using auto scaling. For to provide high performance on the database, I will use read replica or maybe elastic cache to cache the content of my RDS. If I'm having a gaming type of application, streaming type of application, I will surely use elastic cache to maximize the performance of my application. I will use content delivery network CloudFront service to provide high ultra low latency to the end users across the world. This is how you should tackle this particular question in the interview. Now let's move towards the last question of this particular session, the question number 5. And this question number 5 is basically related to the migration strategy inside the organization. So the interviewer is giving you a scenario that your company is basically planning to migrate its on-premise application and databases to the AWS. The application are very, very critical to business operations, and downtime needs to be minimized during the migration. So they need a fast and smooth migration process without any downtime, right? So the question is that what type of strategy as a cloud engineer you use to migrate the on-premise application to the database to AWS with minimal downtime? You should describe the steps and AWS services you would use. Now, as you can see, the question is trying to get the candidate's ability to understand more on the migration strategies, right? What your understanding of the migration strategies in AWS and AWS migration services. So basically, we have couple of AWS migration services and data migration services. You can discuss about those services. So I will be using first lift and shift process. So whatever the data or the application which is inside the on-premises, I will lift and shift the entire data or the application to the AWS. This is the very first thing. I will be using AWS DMS, data migration service, to migrate the data from on-premises to the AWS cloud. I will also employ AWS SMS, which is server migration service, so that I will able to migrate the virtual machines which are currently running on the on-premise data center of the application or the organization. I will use AWS server migration service for migration of the virtual machines. I will also set up a hybrid architecture during this particular transition, so that with the help of different networking services, we have site-to-site VPN, we have to connect on-premise data center to the AWS cloud, we have direct connect, so that this transition will be smooth, right? And I will also ensure thorough testing, also validation before fully cutting over to the AWS. So you can discuss about lift and shift, and you can also discuss about server migration service. You can also discuss about data migration service, whether if they are having X type of database, and if AWS is not allowing X type of database, AWS having Y type of database, we can use schema conversion tool, which will convert the schema of the database X database to the Y database, and data will be the same, but the structure will be different inside AWS, and customers will continuously running their database inside AWS with the help of the Y database. These are the different pointers you can include inside your answer while giving the maybe answer to these particular questions. Okay, so thank you so much, Fox, for watching this video. So if you have watched this video to this particular end, my name is Virendra Jakar. I'm 8 times AWS certified. If you have any doubts on any particular question, or if you need any guidance of AWS interviews, you can contact me on this number, or you can drop an email. Any type of notes or documentations you require to prepare for your interview, you can drop me an email on the cloudvirus@gmail.com. Please do subscribe my YouTube channel and like this video. Thank you so much, folks. We'll meet in the next video. Till then, take care. Bye bye, and have a good day.